So with that, to get us started, we're going to have an opening kind of fireside chat I'm very excited about. It's titled Digital Equity Ecosystems, a National Perspective. So I'm going to welcome up to the stage Dr. Revati Prasad from the Benton Institute, who's going to give some brief remarks and then be joined by Chris Wink from Technically to have a conversation. So thank you and welcome.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Kate, for that introduction, and thank you so much for having me. I used to live in Philadelphia and Fairmount for a little while, and it's always really nice to be back in Philly. And I'm particularly grateful for the opportunity to learn from you all today. I'm Revati Prasad. I lead the Benton Institute for Broadband and Society. I want to believe that we're a household name, but just in case you're not an avid reader of our newsletter and publications, which you should be, we are a 44-year-old nonprofit dedicated to media and telecommunications policy in the public interest. Over the past decade, that has meant a really narrow focus on broadband, but our mission has been constant, which is to ensure that people, all people, have access to the means of communication in ways that advance their lives. And as we all know, that mission has gotten a little harder of late. We seem to have already forgotten the hard lessons that the pandemic taught us, that digital access is essential to every aspect of modern life, that making room in a family budget for an internet connection is getting harder, not easier, and that being online is at times confusing, dangerous, and dispiriting, especially for those with the fewest protections. And yet, Congress allowed the Affordable Connectivity Program to expire without a replacement. The Commerce Department has changed the rules of the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program in ways that will leave many communities with only satellite options. And the Digital Equity Act, a landmark commitment to building capacity and inclusion, was abruptly terminated by a presidential tweet labeled racist and unconstitutional. You already know this. You live it every day. So let me begin by simply saying your work is vital, even more so in the face of these reversals. And also, thank you for staying with it and for showing up for your communities. At Benton, we've spent the last 2 years documenting what we call the human infrastructure of broadband, the people and organizations who help individuals and communities get connected, afford service, and build the digital skills they need to thrive online. That's the librarians, the digital navigators, digital skills trainers, device refurbishers, community organizers, housing authority staff that have added tech support to their job description, many of you. The term infrastructure was really deliberate. Infrastructure isn't just poles and wires and towers. Fiber is actually just glass in the ground without the human work of helping people access it, afford it, use it, and shape how it serves their needs. Infrastructure is the foundation that makes everything else work. And that's why the people doing this work, many of you in this room, are not providing a supplementary service. You're maintaining essential infrastructure. This is the undergirding that allows a digital society and economy to flourish. When we began the project, we were in a celebratory moment. The first time in history that digital equity was recognized and resourced at a federal level, the timeline that Kate just shared. We wanted to help communities, when we started the project, think about how to sustain this work long after the grant dollars will run out. The political moment has shifted, but the lessons we learned during that process, I think, still remain relevant and perhaps even more urgent. I'm not going to recount the whole project. The reports are on our website, the case studies are on our website. I urge you to read them. But I just want to focus on sort of the taxonomy we developed to make sense of the wide variety of work that we call the human infrastructure of broadband, especially in the wake of the pandemic when there was so much need and so much support as a result. We saw that lots of organizations might do similar things, let's say ACP outreach, but how they operated and what they needed differed by the categories these organizations fell into. And we call them core, complementary, and coalition. Core organizations have digital equity as their mission, right? This is what they are working towards. We counted libraries in that bucket because they're working to get people the information that they need. But also organizations like Everyone On or Free Geek in Portland that does device access. We did case studies about them. Core organizations bring deep expertise. They've developed best practices, curricula, scalable models. They know how to respond when policies shift because this is their field. They provide institutional memory in a sector too often defined by short-term funding cycles. But they can't do it all. Their scale is finite, their reach is often local. And that's where the complementary organizations come in. Complementary organizations are those for whom digital equity is instrumental to achieving their goals. A hospital system like Mass General Brigham, which helps patients access telehealth and online medical records because health outcomes depend on digital access. Or housing authorities that help residents get online because lease applications and maintenance requests, it's all digital. Complementary organizations have already established trusted relationships. They're already working with the people who may need digital help. But understandably, there's a limit to the kinds of support they can provide. Your hospital cannot help you figure out how to do online banking. I think it's already immensely clear from this that you do need both, right? Core organizations can't get everywhere, and complementary organizations can't do everything. And then, because I'm a cheeseball and I love an alliteration, we have the third C, which is coalitions. Coalitions bring it all together. They connect the core complementary organizations. They bring in government agencies, the ISPs, the anchor institutions, and crucially, community members themselves. Coalitions help get things done. That's where you share lessons, templates, tactics. They're the folks who can send you the slide deck they use to explain two-factor authentication, or tell you how they convinced the local ISP to show up at a resource fair. But coalitions also do more than coordinate logistics or share resources. They're a vehicle for advocacy and accountability. They amplify voices, align efforts, and make sure that the people most affected by digital inequities have a seat and a say at the table. We need to recognize and resource all three Cs: well-funded core organizations with deep digital equity expertise, support for complementary organizations to integrate digital equity into their everyday work, and we need sustained investment in coalitions to coordinate across sectors and ensure community voices shape policy. The three Cs are not nice to have. They're foundational for a digital society. Because the thing about infrastructure is that it's mostly invisible. It's taken for granted, operating in the background until it breaks down. We notice when it fails, when the pipes burst, the lights go out, the broadband drops. That's when the seams become visible and we get to see who's been left behind. I think most of us here will remember the pandemic era images of students doing homework in like a Taco Bell parking lot. That was when the country saw, finally, what digital inequity looked like. It wasn't new, it was just suddenly undeniable. I was in Asheville, North Carolina earlier this week. It's a beautiful place, and I don't even like nature. Just about a little over a year ago, Hurricane Helene devastated the community, broke down infrastructure of every sort: water, electricity, roads, communication, all down. As close to a communications blackout as you can imagine in this day and age. They have to rebuild so much. I'm not the most optimistic of people, but I got to meet these people who are putting so much care and flair in how they are trying to build something better. So people who support those returning to the community from incarceration are providing resources about that transition, including digital support, a device with service, helpline on how to use it, and they're putting thought into figuring out different types of people returning from incarceration. What do women need? Perhaps they have to navigate a domestic violence situation. What would that look like? They're also setting up these like tech spaces. This is my Flair example, where you can take your beleaguered device and self and get help for your various digital stresses. It's a really fun and inviting space. Tech support as self-care. And they're thinking not just about services and support, but also systems. One of our partners works for a council of governments, and she took it upon herself to develop a communications resilience plan to make sure this does not happen again. She found the right partners, set up listening sessions about how people experience the communications blackout after the hurricane. Rooted in these lived experiences, they're planning for the future. At some point, they heard a federal agency wanted to send in experts to develop their own plan, and she said, sure, happy to get input about frequency interference, but the experts, the people who know what it was like, how the mountains and tree cover in relation to where you were impacted people's experiences, and the hacks they developed to get around these obstacles. Those experts, they're already here. She's right, of course. People who live it know it best. But it's also a wonderful move. In the face of federal dysfunction or a state that can't pass a budget, which may sound familiar to you, her approach is about local ingenuity and resourcefulness. And it's also about power. She is laying out the stakes. We talk about making sure community has a seat at the table. Nope, this is the community setting the table and then inviting others in. The communities will not be told what a communication resilience plan is, like a big Leslie note binder, and how it should work. They'll tell you where the breakdowns happened and what they need to fix it. I think it's a wonderful reminder that policy is about politics, is about power. I think Philadelphia knows this better than most. This is a city that has always known how to build power from the ground up. Neighborhood movements, labor organizing, community broadband networks. Digital equity work is at its heart power building work. It's about giving people the tools to speak, to learn, to earn, to participate, to belong. It's about ensuring that no one is disconnected from opportunity or democracy. And that's why what you do matters so deeply. Over the course of today, I'll be listening to you, your ideas, your frustrations, your breakthroughs. I want to know what you're learning, what you need, and also how Benton can help. Thank you.
Sit as far away from each other as possible. All right. That way the turns combative, there's space.
I already feel like we're going to have a blood feud.
Hello, everyone. I'm Chris Wink. Hello. Hi, I'm Chris Wink. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Technically. We're a news organization. We, for 16 plus years, covered digital equity among a bunch of other technical issues. So super excited. We've used Benton research in the past. Excited to chat. In your remarks.
Wonderful to meet a reader.
Yeah, wonderful. I am. Yeah, I'm one of those people who download the PDF. So thanks for that. Hearing your remarks, what first stood out to me is we kind of have this like assumption that all those reversals were going to happen. So I guess I first wanted to actually say, do you think this conversation, this work, has to be coded in a way that there will be political swings? Or is it possible to build a narrative in which this is seen as work that is important regardless of the political dynamic?
Absolutely not. This is not a partisan issue at all. We work in red states and blue states. I'm
going to come closer to you because now it just feels weird.
Okay,
Yeah, sorry.
right. We work with folks in Missouri who are committed and understand why they need both digital access and digital opportunity. Sure, we'll call it opportunity. It is not.
I'm doing great.
Yeah, this is not distracting at all.
Yeah. We're in it for the long term. You'll forget about this in 3 minutes. All right, go ahead.
Where was I?
Sorry.
Missouri, the show me state. I'm just trying to remember where I was in the. This is not a partisan issue.
Yeah.
We have conversations with state legislators in Nebraska. We have conversations with state legislators in Massachusetts. Everybody understands that this is about like basics of life and understands that this is a problem that hasn't been solved. It's interesting because infrastructure is largely read as a rural problem because it's more expensive to build out infrastructure in rural areas. But it's not just a rural problem, it is also an urban issue. Who gets what kind of infrastructure is something that it is important to draw attention to. And affordability matters to everybody. Like, everybody has to pay way too much for their internet connection. So this doesn't, it is currently a political issue. It is currently partisan at the federal level, but not at state levels, definitely not at local levels.
Okay, I like that. Let me linger once more, and then let's go to state and local. Because I was going to say, yeah, it very much is a partisan issue right now. I listened to your remarks, absolutely, and I think most people sitting here was like, yep, we swung. Is that why? Why is it different at the federal level? And can people in this room or people who should be in this room do something about that? Is there a way to remove any of the partisan tone that this particular issue has?
I think at the federal level, there is a need to fight, and at the state and local level, there is a need to build. So the reversal, it honestly is a little bit baffling. The current administration could have come in, the BEAD awards hadn't gone out, they could have been the ones to send them out, and then just take a victory lap. Look how much fiber we built. The Biden administration couldn't get it done, we did it. But they chose not to do that. They chose to slow down the process. They chose to make all the states redo their work and their planning. And then they made choices that undermine the actual purpose of the funding. And now they are claiming that there are these savings that are going to go back to the Treasury, which not by statute, no it's not. It's supposed to stay with the states. So I don't want to prognosticate about why there's this particular swing, but it didn't have to be. Yeah. There's no real reason why it would be. The Digital Equity Act, of course, is a different matter slightly because there is a larger conversation around the word equity that the current administration does not like. Some places, red states mostly, they try to shift. They tried to, nothing changed about the program, but they called it the Digital Opportunity Plan. That didn't really fool anyone, so they still canceled the act, or they tried to terminate the grants. But digital equity is also coded as a racial issue, which is why there's pushback from this particular administration. But to be very clear, 80% of every state, at least 80%, is considered a covered population. So one of the 8 categories of people that are supposed to be served through the Digital Equity Act. So when you get down to actually doing grants, like smaller grants at the state level, it is again, not partisan. The work is not partisan. Nobody, you can convince any person of any political stripe that this is not a partisan issue. This is just practical.
I wrote down your 3 C's, thanks for the alliteration, and I'm going to touch on them, but coalitions in particular, you and I talked about that, stood out to me. One last kind of corollary on the federal level and then go to state and local. So we technically cover technology use in lots of ways. That shows up in digital equity, but it shows up in entrepreneurship and other ways. And so another federal program on the entrepreneurship side, I've been watching with interest in comparison to kind of like a BEAD plus kind of stuff. And the Federal Commerce Department operated a thing called Tech Hubs, which was heavily oriented around commercializing science and entrepreneurship under the Biden administration. And insiders were like very nervous about how that was going to be coded. Was that going to be perceived as an overly political issue and get squashed or not? And to be clear, it's still very much an open question, but a couple weeks ago, a couple months ago, the program got a rebrand, and insiders were very quietly like, that's great news, because then they can pretend that it wasn't a Biden administration program. For people who cared about that program, they were most interested in it lasting. And then a couple weeks ago, entities that had already been pre-qualified were given a notice of opportunity of funding, and they can move forward with that funding request. And insiders were like, that's really good. It's quietly moving forward. And the 2 things that I learned from that case study around commercialized science and entrepreneurship, and why I'm curious how it relates to digital access and digital equity, is a bunch of people were like, you know what, we are most interested in the coalition building work, and you may not be, that's okay, but those particular entities were trying to build political coalitions. They were updating language. There was a lot of like Control F, remove those words things, which you can be horrified or not, but that particular case study was interested in moving that program along. And they were very interested in it being quiet. they didn't want a lot of attention. They wanted it to not reach a lot of political interest, and it's like very quietly move forward. And those are some of the case studies that I wonder how much this work wants to or could learn from how a lot of people, and I've interviewed a lot of them, were really interested in how they showed up and how they were coded, which seems like, I don't know how we think about that, but seems like at least an important issue of that moment. And Benton, you're seeing at a very national level, do you think that work is being done about how do we make this topic less polarizing at the federal level?
100%. There are programs within the larger broadband investment, and that have continued. Surprisingly, things are happening. The Connecting Minority Communities program did not get any kind of cut, or they seem to not have noticed that it exists. The Tribal Broadband Connectivity Program, at least so far, seems to be progressing. The Middle Mile program seems to be progressing. There's a lot that is just happening quietly. You can argue that because of the interests, the particular interest around broadband deployment, the companies that were interested, the companies that were going to apply for it, there was more attention at the federal level. It's also a lot of money. It's $42 billion. But at the same time, the Capital Projects Funds was $10 billion, and that continues to go out, and there's no attempt to squash that in any way. So there's plenty that's happening quietly. A lot of career folks at NTIA, the National Telecommunications and Information Administration, are still trying to achieve the same goals they had before, which is just connectivity for all. Everybody gets internet access. So there's lots that happening quietly, but there are some times when, so this is brand new, as of yesterday, the National Digital Inclusion Alliance filed a lawsuit because they were one of the organizations that won a competitive grant under the Digital Equity Act. They had a signed contract, they were moving along, it was a lot of money, and because the president tweeted that this was racist and unconstitutional, a couple of days later they get a letter saying this is canceled, and there is no ability to appeal. So they filed a lawsuit as of yesterday, and this is an organization of less than 30 people, and they're now having to sue the federal government. And the suit alleges both, this is a violation of Article 1, you don't get to decide what the money is for, and then also it's a violation of the Administrative Procedures Act, which is simply, this is not how you do business. You can't just randomly say there's no appeal and cancel a contract. So it's going to be interesting to see how that progresses. It's nice to see a fight because in the absence of the fight, the narrative has been defined by folks that really don't like the word equity. And I was very heartened to see how much of the legislation, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, just gets quoted directly in the complaint saying, this is what Congress decided. This is what they defined as digital equity. This is not a racial issue. This is understanding need and addressing need program. So fingers crossed.
Is digital equity still the phrase that Benton and you, it's the, yep.
We're not really fooling anyone.
Yep. All right, let's get out of national context. Let's go state and local, because you spoke a bit about that. What are you seeing nationally around either state coalitions, like rural urban dynamics coming together to push forward and shape a narrative of what this stuff means? Are there examples you like or lessons you have?
Right now, at the state coalition level, most of the attention is geared towards the BEAD applications. So for those who may not know, we are at a point where nearly all states have submitted their final proposal, but it's not final because now there's going to be one more round for reasons. So, but for instance, Pennsylvania was allocated $1.1 billion roughly, and they're spending, because of the changes in rules, they're spending about $800 million. So there's $400 million left that belong to Pennsylvania. And so the two sort of state level pushback that is needed right now, and you needed to come from both red states and blue, you needed to come from rural governors and rural senators, as well as those representing cities, is that A, please stop messing around with the BEAD rules and let these plans that have been written, rewritten one more time, the bids that have already gone out, let them just do the thing now. Give us the money and let us start building. Pennsylvania is actually in an okay place. I think there's 65% fiber. There are places that are 50% fiber and like almost that much for satellite, but Pennsylvania is in a better position. And then the second fight is, and I'm hopeful that there will be attention across the country around this, is what is called non-deployment funds. So this is money that in some places is going to be more money than you were going to get from Digital Equity Act. But these were the kinds of activities that were supposed to make the infrastructure deployment smoother. And part of that is making it so that people have devices, making it so that people can connect. There is flexibility in how the non-deployment uses are defined in statute. That can cover a lot of the work that people in this room do. But the NTIA has decided not to issue any guidance, and they have made claims that because, say, Pennsylvania only is spending $800 out of their $1.1 billion, they're gonna take it back and give it to the Treasury. That is not what the law says. The law says you spend it how the states deem necessary. If there's leftover money, it does not go back to the Treasury. It goes back to the pool and then gets allocated to other states and other places that need the help. So this is Pennsylvania money by statute. So, and it's North Dakota money. So there is vested financial interests in fighting for that money so that you can make sure that a lot of activities from like permitting reform, but also device distribution can happen and make the networks that you're building actually viable.
Okay, let's talk a bit about network building, coalition building. I feel like that's really relevant for this audience. I think a lot about this. Something that stands out to me is, on paper, Pennsylvania should be well positioned. We are a purple state. We have congressional delegations and a governor that has a kind of version of being able to work across different political environments. Relatively big state. We have two big economic engines. Like, we on paper should be good at this. In a lot of ways, we're not. And one of my thoughts that I would love your reaction to is, I don't know about folks in the audience, but I've always really identified as a Philadelphian first, and I've not really ever had a Pennsylvanian identity. I didn't grow up in this state. I very much view myself as a Philadelphian. We also technically report in Pittsburgh, and I've been super interested in how Pittsburgh a lot of times has a Pennsylvania identity. And I've watched that, like, the Pennsylvania coalition happening is like Pittsburgh and Pennsylvania, and then Philadelphia's over here. And we're a pretty big regional economy, so in some places we can do okay. But right now, the discourse seems to me to be at the state level so often. We don't seem to carry that same favor. So I wonder if you have any advice or guidance for us about states' identity, or when regions are going at their own, or like, what are you seeing about rural urban? Like, just talk to me a bit about how you're seeing that strategy build out, and whether we should make sure we can show up as a Pennsylvania, as part of the Pennsylvania story.
Absolutely. Kate is, so Benton helped establish something called the
Thanks,
Keystone
Kate.
Internet Coalition that brings together that Pittsburgh community as well as the Philadelphia community. Kate helps coordinate it.
Kate, you should organize a conference to talk about that.
should tell folks.
Okay, all right.
And I don't need to tell you, Kate can, it's her work, that the Keystone Internet Coalition, KIC, has done a bunch of work in getting legislators to sign on to letters, to push back on some of the BEAD issues, as well as at the same time do like practical things, like working on a digital navigation sort of standards and apprenticeship program that could have some interest around workforce development issues in the state. So there's a fair amount happening, but
So you'd say Kate is doing a good job, is what you'd
Kate
say.
is doing great. Everybody yay for Kate.
Check. I checked that. Kate didn't plant that question. I promise. All right, I gotta keep moving through. So that's some state coalition stuff. Let's touch on the human infrastructure concept that you alluded to in your remarks. Benton has a new report around this. I think we are looking at the human infrastructure. What lessons do you want people to be taking from that work?
When we were starting this work, I would often hear folks at every level just be like, yeah, well, digital equity is just like part of everything. We should just like integrate it in everything. And that used to make me panic because I see the value of complementary organizations, but when there are funding crunches, when people are overtaxed for a whole host of reasons, digital equity might be the thing that gets dropped from a housing authority or a healthcare space. So you need core support. You always need support for organizations that are first and foremost dedicated to digital equity. Also, technology is evolving and it may or may not be taking us with it. So it's also necessary to have sort of the technical expertise for folks that are whose job it is going to be looking for the next thing and keeping a focus on. So one of my sort of bugaboos is to talk about how important it is to understand the relationships between core and complementary and what they bring to the table, and then also to emphasize the need for coalitions. Coalitions are so important in being able to do the things, but also decide what is the things that need to get done, to set the agenda, to bring people together. And they're not easy to do. Like there's so much invisible labor that goes into running a coalition, so much emotional labor that goes into running a coalition. You are sometimes a therapist, sometimes like a logistics coordinator, and you are sending emails, so many emails. And keeping people interested, keeping people coming back so that they receive value and want to show up, and at the same time, genuinely drawing participation for them so they will contribute and have their own agenda that will make it properly a coalition. It's a lot of work. Coalitions need, much like TLC functions, coalitions need like an anchor, like a backbone organization. And I want to see those kinds of support at a local level too. And then I want place-based philanthropy to get more involved. So if there's any place-based philanthropy in the room, I will find you and I will chew your ear off about how important it is for place-based philanthropy to be investing in digital equity issues.
Is one of our challenges just that there's so many, I mean, I guess it goes both ways. There's so many circles in that coalition, so you could say it's stronger, but that also is an inherent weakness.
Yeah, I find that it's helpful. I think we've found that it's helpful because we're doing these advocacy coalitions for a coalition to have like a set purpose. You can't organize everyone around everything, but it is helpful to have, this is where I go for my policy updates. These people will come and tell me what is happening at the federal level. I don't have to pay attention to that. And then they'll tell me when I need to get involved and what the stakes are. And then I can bring my community, my organizations along for that ride. So I think just functionally, it's too much to ask a coalition to do all of the coordinating things. You kind of need this coalition is for this purpose. We're going to do policy advocacy.
There's like, I'm sure many of you are quite schooled in such a world of like community organizing more broadly and coalition building more broadly that this work so represents, and that is one of the challenges of like, how do you draw the circle big enough, the tent big enough that it has political power and influence without drawing it so wide that then it like lacks meaning or it's hard to like
and you can't get people together. Yep.
Yeah. So I mean, just speak about like, how are people drawing that line? I mean, what's in my mind is right now there is hot debate around how we should talk about AI governance, AI policy, AI education and access. That seems way over here. Mm-hmm. But when I look in this room, if we're going from getting people hooked up to getting digital skills, I can remember doing stories in 2010 about let's make sure people know how to apply for jobs, which yes is deeply important, but I worry sometimes we're going to be left behind in a conversation that is going to like accelerate beyond us, and we'll be left to wither and we'll lose efficacy in our work. How do you think about when we got to like grow the coalition? That must be a Benton conversation of,
Yeah.
ooh, do we got to include this group now in the coalition?
Yeah, we have to walk and chew gum at the same time, and it's not particularly fun. There are conversations around tech policy, right? Like, so AI often goes in the tech policy bucket, and digital access, universal service, these issues are sort of considered telecommunications issues and pushed to the side. We're talking about the federal landscape. It is hard work to bring the folks that are doing tech policy as they see it into this conversation, partly because the people that make decisions in this country are folks that are connected. They can't imagine a world in which, by the way, a fourth of the people in this country do not have large format devices. And they cannot understand that there are still about millions of households that don't have regular connectivity. They do. So for them, technology is about, well, it's about how does it feel to be online, whether my privacy is being respected or not, et cetera. So they're coming to it at a different level, and that's why it's hard, it has been difficult, to get them to also understand that access is also tech policy. This is also tech policy. And that's kind of what we're trying to work on. And then the flip of that is also conversations with sector-specific organizations and sector-specific funders. So to make the argument to education or healthcare or really anything, that they also need to be thinking about digital equity. So we kind of have to expand what we consider like central and also sort of make friends everywhere in this space.
I'm going to lose you in a second, so two little additional questions. One, I've been accused of overusing the essential utility metaphor, but like I get very stuck in the what do we learn from electrification? What do we learn from advancement of potable water? And one version of that metaphor that sits with me right now is there are still like very important, crucial nonprofits working on potable water access in the United States. There are still right now working about electrification conversations right now. We're century plus in that work. That still exists, but we know in our minds that kind of went to a different, it's very mountainous communities. It's like working on tribal communities. There's very specific cases that work is being done. And I think when I've covered this community, I'm not necessarily in this community, but as a journalist, I've covered this community for going on 18 years. And when I think about this work, I think that march is happening in a way that these conversations have to pick one path. That either we're going to like stay very focused on the crucial idea of connectivity, and it's going to be about infrastructure, and it may move more rural, or it might be about cost of access, or some in this room are going to keep moving to what people do once they are connected, or what the economic opportunity is that, and that language will shift. Do you think Benton, 44 years young as an entity, like how does your vision of what this work progress into, and what advice might you have for a group that has to continue to evolve with the technology as it moves?
I'd actually push back and say I don't think there are people that are working on access that aren't also thinking about use. It simply isn't possible to. So I think the initial work and what we are considering the ultimate goal are actually one and the same thing. But I actually have a little thing that I like to talk about is the utility metaphor is very, very valid and important, but I like to point out that that's a policy issue. That is an issue that utilities get regulated and services don't. So you can talk about price controls, you can talk about service disruption levels with utilities because there is a regulatory mechanism. Broadband doesn't get to qualify as a utility, even though we think of it as a utility. It is commonsensical that it would be a utility. You need it every day. You want your house wired with broadband just as you want it wired with electricity. But the word is really, that's almost like a third rail at national level politics, because there's going to be a huge fight around what is and is not a utility. Mm-hmm. Partly our approach has been to think of it as pushing the idea of infrastructure, and the next step I hope to take is the utility conversation. I am told it is a fool's errand, but I might be trying anyway.
Who's more foolish than you? I think I get one last chance at a question. So you have this impressive cohort, human infrastructure, today that'll be talking about these issues. What's your like kind of resounding send to them? What should they be talking about today? Thinking about what's next. Send us off with what you want them to talk about today.
I think there should be a fight around non-deployment funds. I don't know if it's winnable, but it is definitely necessary to fight for it. To say that this money, it is Pennsylvania money. Give it.
Cheers to that. Give her a big round of applause.